Hello and good afternoon, and other such words that people say when they're prepared and awake and ready to roll, which arguably I am and am not. Still drinking a bit of coffee. So, if you haven't been here for a quiet stream before, uh, I usually kind of go a little bit more head down to the artwork and don't narrate the whole time or chat as much. That being said, sometimes part of the process, for me at least, is kind of talking through certain ideas. So I don't know. I'm on the fence today as to whether I should go ahead and just mute and have the music on and work on this, or if there's probably going to be a bit of me muttering to myself. We'll find out. But let's go over to the art side. Let's just go ahead and go. So, on the art ramble on Monday, I talked a lot about the world building and concepting and such of this character. This character of mine from various versions over the last year or so that I've been developing it and kind of examining the different stages, both uh, fictionally speaking and like design and concept wise. There's a lot of things that I kind of reused or simplified, but I've been desiring something a little more complicated and a little more indicative of the strange and changing nature of the character. So, in theory, the idea is that I want to do some concept work in a more legitimate fashion, not just draw one drawing and that's it. That's the canon. Like I want to explore some different forms and shapes and silhouettes. I want to think about different ways it can move and how I would execute that as like a V2 brig or puppet or whatever, so that I can do more with it. Maybe do some weird storytelling sort of video or something like that. One of the things that I thought would be interesting all along is if I made V2 Briggs and some had characters tell stories or uh, have like little monologues and stuff like that. Uh, a couple minutes of dialogue with the acting and animation that comes with a moving rig. Uh, but we're still getting to the early stages of that. I still need the concept. I still need to figure out what it is this thing can look like, how how its form can change, and I tried working on a new iteration, which I felt was interesting, but ultimately feels a bit static. It has a skeleton and it follows like even though the skeleton is not fully positioned, I still ended up creating a kind of overly human silhouette. And I tried to play with that a little bit by chopping it up and moving stuff around and seeing where I could position and make it better. But and same with this, trying to clean up some of the perspective problems and construction and solid drawing problems of previous drawings where it doesn't make a lot of sense to have this kind of bowl shape stapled onto the side of something else. You know, uh, it's more likely that it was kind of sunken into the housing and things like that. Trying to think of it in 3 dimensions and different shapes, and the versions that are using equipment, like a hermit crab with a shell, are going to be different inherently than the freeform version. Sorry. So what I'm kind of after is I don't know why I did this as such a wide boy, but like that's one of the things I wanted to mess with is the silhouette. The arrangement of bones and objects that might be inside that may allow me to create a sense of expression without facial features. Being able to morph and change the shape from something like rounded to something long and lanky, or broad and kind of like tapered, uh, from a gorilla like sort of pose, maybe with big forelimbs and small back limbs or whatever. Uh, Try and keep the same relative mass is the idea. But we're gonna see what I can come up with. And I will put some of the art music on just to fill the background a little bit. I'm like I said, I may or may not mute microphone for a little while, just while I am waking up, and so you're not hearing coughing and snuffling and all that good stuff. But trying to be a little more engaged. If I'm gonna live stream it, I might as well be. And I guess the quiet stream is not necessarily just about sitting there and doing the music and art as much as just the tone of it. It's not an essay. It's a quiet afternoon just drawing. So hopefully, we'll get a bit of that today, and I'll find the balance between silence and non-communication, and talking through a visual problem, talking about the design a little bit. We'll see. We'll see if I can find the balance. In addition to the music, I might normally have a bit of additional white noise just from me, but apparently YouTube is being a little harsh, applying some CPU drain to anyone who has AdBlock installed, even if they're not using it for YouTube. I'll find another way to get my white noises fixed for focus. Alright, where to begin? soon as I look away from the chat, a flurry of messages. No, yeah. Sometimes for the stream, I don't say a lot. I think the music was up high enough, but sometimes I can't tell. Especially times like now. Why does it seem so much quieter? Applying a bunch of negative decibels to music is always a very strange way to do a stream. Or strange way to do an audio stream, that is. Well, at least there will be a little music now. If I am distracted. While it is somewhat entertaining for me to come up with weird shapes and slap names on it, I've not done this process very often, so it's a little bit new to me. And I feel like it's a little harder for me to see how the libs and stuff will be attached. Be patient with this combination of processes. Also, too many windows to manage. There we go. Let's see, what other shapes and inspiration can I draw from? I think some of it will be when I narrow down what sort of forms I'm looking at. But I do envy when other people have very clear, easily defined shape language. I think I have a little bit more trouble. I do find that I enjoy more top-heavy design, interestingly enough, where the upper limbs and the like are more exaggerated, it's more insect-like in its distribution, perhaps. I don't know why that is. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, maybe I need to expand this a little bit. Just the torso shape is not doing it. It's how it relates to other stuff. I probably need to be a bit more gestural with it. Really do kind of like a real life four-legged view. It's just a good silhouette, but a little too derivative in some ways. I've been toying with the idea of a sort of eye, if that makes sense. A sort of focal point within swear I've got a plan here. Sort of focal point within wow. Love it when I can't get the words to complete trying to actually do the thing. Kind of like an iris-like element that is not anchored to a single position. And instead moves about in the form a little bit. Which is a bit more alien, but it does give me a point of expression if I'm not using the skull to denote sort of head movement. The challenge might be in the masking, but one of the interesting things that can be done with it is having the masking be what creates the expression. The only problem is I don't know if I can adjust the mask as easily and dynamically in like VTube Studio, for example. But just having this sort of Eye of Sauron-esque sort of thing that I can create expression with. I can do a better example of this. Let's see. Get this circle. There's a tool for this, actually. I swear there's some sort of effect brush or something that's speed lines or something along that nature. But I cannot recall where it is. It's gonna drive me mad. Where is it? pattern. I found it like several times and then boom, it's gone. Of course it is. Why would it be easy? Either way, the concept in theory is that I can create a mask so we mask outside the selection. And then we make some adjustments. We soften these edges up a little bit. So what I'm dealing with here is I think there's effectively 2-layer masks, but let's just say it's something like this. So if I create something that's super focused yet. So basically I create a pupil of sorts. Similarly soften the edge of this so that it blends a little bit better. But this is a completely separate element, and so the only problem is that it becomes a little bit too much of an eye if I get too much like this, but the concept would be that I can move this. I can move and change the shape of this and cause it to, look or change the rest of it, but this is, like I said, a little bit too close to a natural eye, and I feel like I want to get something a little bit more. Alien. But as you can see, I could shrink it dynamically depending on the shape keys and stuff I use in VTube Studio and the like. I would have to create multiple shape keys in the rig, which is possible. It's not, not crazy. But the cool thing about some of these is, I could do weird stuff with it. Like, have atypical shapes. Have it pop to different shapes so that you recognize that it's not fully. Just like a human iris. Maybe having some sort of shape that is really indicative of something else it would see. So now we're thinking that's something I don't have reference of on my board because I was not thinking that small yet. But if I'm focusing a design around that sort of visual element, that is possible because, one of the things that I can also do is if I'm doing something like this, I can have I can still have the skull as a separate element. Within that, that can move around and still give me the head motion, while this sort of aura gives me a bit more expressiveness in or around the shape. It does require me to give it a little bit more breathing room, which means the skull might be smaller in focus in the overall shape, especially if I need like a bigger body shape to kind of fill this part in, which I, definitely have a few examples. Let's see what quickly I can find in the way of irises. And I'll spare you the Google search window, but stuff I do come up with will go onto the board, the ever-expanding board. It already has dozens of images, and there's lots of different takes that people have created for slime or plasmoid type characters, but a lot of them, interestingly enough, they just stay close to like humanoid forms and mimic different things. Some of them are a little bit more dramatic in their execution, like this one in particular I thought was interesting. It has a kind of slug-like head. Um and the skeleton that's within it is there and kind of providing a roughly humanoid shape along with the silhouette, but it's not. Uh, it's not basically just a person made out of that. Same goes for some of these other concepts where, it's clearly like snake-like things inhabiting armor, or things that have a little bit more floatiness to the forms. Then of course you've got the really weird stuff where they've eschewed regular forms and created crazy stuff, which I like. But I also am not terribly unliking. I'm not disliking some of the more humanoid forms that also like mimic clothing and things like that, like extending form beyond the body and not thinking of clothing as something you have to wear but something you can imitate. I do kind of like that, like this cloak in the concept, this other jellyfish like form that has legs and stuff in it. I do kind of like that as well. And disconnected forms where people have limbs and stuff that don't feel connected in the traditional way. Yeah, there was a bunch of inspiration drawn from people's concepts and stuff around like plasmoid characters and stuff. I could probably delve into like the symbiote realm and find even more stuff, but I like I like the ones where they play with the shapes a little bit more and they just create something a bit more wacky. And I again seem to be really fond of top heavy designs. I really like these designs here in the reference that are kind of a little bit more alien and serious, but have not yet found my position amongst those things. And I do like multiple limbs and singular, simplistic breakpoints. I don't necessarily want to have like any sort of internal cellular structure though. That would indicate, like a single-celled organism that's gotten larger than life. I think that's cool. It's just not really for me in this concept. Should probably expand my reference a little bit so that when I do highlight stuff, you know what the hell I'm talking about. We're gonna try and find some irises real quick before I forget what I was doing. As is the danger. Good to know I've already gotten to the halfway point and accomplished almost nothing. Perfect. That's great for me. I can find plenty of reference for like human eyes, obviously. But there are lots of interesting irises for animals. In particular, there's some interesting ones from the aquatic side that I would need to look at. That's a good collection. Look at that. So all sorts of unique iris forms. We've got human eyes, we've got eagles, we've got squirrels and stuff with flat irises. Or eyes with no irises, although some without any form of iris, I will have a lack of expression. And I would need to find a way to determine direction, or maybe it would be the shape overall of that iris that would invoke something. So it would be like a faux lidding of the iris. How am I describing this? Let's duplicate this layer. Let's play around a little bit. So, for example, if I wanted to have something that was a bit more solid as the iris, let's give something next here, shall we? Especially if we do it on the right layer, that might help. So if we have something that's a bit more solid, a bit more textured perhaps, then we do something then effectively we're talking about messing with this, right? So, shifting and moving this around as sort of a mask. Indicate direction. But I don't know about that one. I feel like that suggests a degree of opacity that I am not looking for. Sorry, it took me a long time to find that word. I am really struggling today. But yeah, finding a degree of opacity that I'm not really after. Although that is one way to go, and maybe I'll come back around to something like that. Maybe it'll be a combination of all these things in the end. Maybe I'll have a very complex eye sort of apparatus that imports a lot of the expression that I'm hoping for without having to do as much of it through the rest of the body. Although the rest of the body, the posture, the sort of changing of shape, that's the more dramatic version of all of this, where as the eye concept is kind of contained. And I'm trying to think if I've seen it somewhere before, if I'm inadvertently copying like some sort of thing that I've experienced before. It does happen sometimes. Almost 99% of the time it's unintentional. 1% of the time I bring in something that I'm inspired by more directly, but a lot of the time I just do not recall what all I have seen. So I've absorbed so much media in my lifetime. Let's see. I like some of these square ones. Some stuff that's from aquatic creatures makes sense. Although I don't want to limit myself specifically to that. Because why would I? This is a creature that does not exist anywhere in our known world, and I am trying to borrow from whatever and however I can. Let's narrow our field of examination a little bit. So there are some things from nature that we need to think about. So, like, the nature of some of these irises does have implicit connections. I'm doing a lot more talking than I thought, but I'm trying to figure this out. One of the images that I just came across gave me some explanations for why some of the irises are the way that they are. And there's some interesting things here. Uh, Horizontal pupils seem to be like more indicative of prey animals designed to spot motion of predators and the like. And keep the ground in kind of sharp focus, like limiting the direction of light so that you're always keeping your footing in play. But all of these different pupils like focus and change light and change definition and such, but I also need to think about what they express. Like vertically slitted stuff is often viewed as predatory and alien. These wave-shaped pupils and stuff are a little less common, but most of the horizontally focused pupils end up evoking more of a mouth than an eye, and that could backfire on me if I'm trying to create something expressive, but I'm not trying to create like a flapping mouth. So people might not immediately understand on seeing it. A lot of fish eyes are very round pupiled, for sure. And they have a lot of interesting contrast to them. A lot of shine. They pick up light in a different way, which might be informative for color and pattern, because I do notice that light seems to hit them from multiple angles in ways that is not as clear in other eyes. Interestingly enough, there's an anatomical image that might explain that. There's actually another eye within a fish eye. Like a perfect sphere kind of connected inside the membrane that creates a fully rounded lens, which is a little bit different than the human eye, I believe. I don't think it has that round element. That's fascinating. It does appear that a lot of octopus eyes are like a kind of strange They're like kind of square, but not. They pinch down rather uniquely compared to some of the other stuff. Cephalopods apparently have the same like internal round lens that they're kind of squishing all of this stuff around. I do find it fascinating that they have kind of an eye within an eye, and there's all this structure around it to allow it to move and refocus and change. I've been trying not to draw from cephalopods and stuff as much, at least not the common ones, for all of this, just because all things underwater end up having tentacles in the end, it seems, when it comes to concepting things. And I wasn't really going for that. Been trying to examine other creatures and the like. I definitely have a certain attachment or interest in crustaceans and stuff. It's sort of unique body construction and the like. It's just great big giant insects of the sea, basically. Um, but I do find the limbs rather mechanical and inflexible compared to what I'm trying to create. Here I am. I already get stuck in the details way too much. Let's pull back a little bit. Let's. Let's just see if we can rough out some interesting shapes. Wow, a lot of stabilization left on that brush. Yeah, I don't like how rough that brush is. It's too scrungly. It bothers me. Let's also go to a brighter. Let's go to a little bit brighter canvas. Not super bright, but bright enough. So I can paint in some shapes. Now we're getting into some full body shapes. Oop. I don't know how I feel about any of them. Now we're getting into things a little bit. I still kind of like this stronger spherical looking element with kind of quadruped feel. One trick I've sometimes seen is that when you're dealing with something that is you're trying to get a silhouette of, but you don't want to obscure certain foreground elements, is to use just a slightly different shade from the foreground or background, usually the reverse of this. Big bulbous lad. Let's see. Harken back to some of our earlier torso shapes, perhaps. Can't see them because they're a similar shape. Right. Of course. There is, of course, one interesting I should be doing this with sort of silhouette, or not with selection. It's much quicker. It almost looks like a cartoon head with ears. What I have with this one is ending up with crab-like limbs holding it up, and I want to kind of limit how much I invoke that sort of imagery. If I keep them kind of stumpy and not having 4 or more segments, maybe that will help. I kind of don't hate that. It's a strange one, and it has a similar sort of element, I would say, in some ways to my current rig, in that it's kind of just it's a head with some limbs. But what I like about it is, depending on what I have for some of the base elements, I can have a bit of that chimera element where it picks up things. I don't know if you've ever seen images of like an octopus will grab a clamshell on both sides of it and run around with it underneath itself, but when it needs to hide, it'll like flip it shut. So like the idea of like grabbing things but not wearing them like a hat, and instead like kind of sitting on them like a raft and generating limbs outside of that. The only thing it doesn't have is any form of like arm articulation, so I don't get to, do my big wave situation unless I have additional limbs and stuff, different pseudopod sort of elements that come out from this part at the top, which is possible. It's very possible. Let me combine this one down. Let me think about that a little bit, and I'll come back to it. Because I don't want to get caught up with chasing one of them too much. This is definitely a weird one that I kind of like. It's got that brain in a jar feel, which is a bit more alien and less body-like, which I appreciate. Being able to drift away from a fully human silhouette and imitating machines and things like that, I feel like will be ways that I can mess with the silhouette ideas and create a unique design or form that does not immediately evoke, this is, a human silhouette with stuff stapled to it. Uh, I want to kind of like deconstruct it a little bit more. To that end, I did just have an interesting idea of this sort of thing with with a similar sort of base plate sort of feel, but then having shoulders or whatever that kind of come up. It is starting to feel a bit mushroom-like when I do that, though. Unless I start modifying things a little bit. Wish I was faster at this process, but I've not done it enough. And the question becomes lower body again. evoke a little bit of earlier skeletal design. Where it seems like there's a little bit of an effort to create the structure, but not fully. Nah, I don't like the spinal column in there. I mean, the spinal column is always a cool bit of imagery when you get to like include it, but it's too easy for it to start looking like if you include the skull and the spinal column, it feels very much like it was derived from human form, which is not something I want to sort of encourage. Definitely a bit more of an intimidating stance, that's for sure. Also, very broad, like very, very wide as a structure, which may or may not be a problem. Something that's relatively square or that's vertical is not too bad, but when you start getting a rig or silhouette that's super wide, it takes up a lot of screen space when you're like doing streams and stuff. But if it is a form as opposed to the form, that might not be bad. Definitely getting somewhere. Warming to this process a little bit. I still think, for simplicity's sake, the third one here is probably strongest. Fourth one, rather. But I kind of like this one as an all around. I kind of like this one as a sort of intimidation posture. Definitely noticed that a lot of these forms I'm grounding them as something that would move along the bottom as opposed to something that would swim, even though the environment is, fully underwater. And I'm trying to think of why I would do that. I guess because it's the more familiar forms. I'm used to terrestrial creatures. You know, I'm not exactly landlocked, but I'm not exactly living in a world where I spend a lot of time around fish. I think it's also challenging to blend those two things because, grasping limbs and stuff like that are not, arms and things that are designed for throwing or legs that are designed for running, things like that. They don't play as well or feel as useful in an underwater space. So if you have, something with like human arms or whatever, but human legs don't make sense for the swimming. So you end up with tentacles or fishtail, and you can just basically create a mermaid again. And I kind of didn't want to create just a mermaid like creature. I ended up kind of drifting in that direction with this, and the silhouette was so clearly like mermaid inspired that while it was practical and while it did work, I didn't want it because I want this thing to. I want you to have questions about how it moves. And in that way, like just a big, floating orb of whatever is kind of a very simple form. So maybe I need to make sure I include a version of that where it's just something kind of. The reason I don't like this is because this almost immediately, at least in fantasy and sci-fi culture and stuff like that, evokes something like a beholder. The classic tentacly floaty sphere monster. I don't really want to be in that same space. I do want to explore maybe the jellyfish idea because I did kind of like the jellyfish sort of idea. A little more rounded bell. And I think the reference that I saw, like a bit of this, it just basically had the head within the bell and then like had multiple it still had a very humanoid body kind of attached to make it move. I do like the thicker like ribbon like tentacle elements, but I also yeah, there's things to like, but I don't necessarily love or want the sort of humanoid torso, which is where I guess it would be interesting to have. And this is much broader, perhaps, than I intended. I don't know. I think it's in part because it ends up looking a little bit like a what's the word? I'm like a Goomba. You know, it's just a lanky legged mushroom. Unless you really kind of play up the strange internal workings, I guess. But I do kind of like the sort of ribbon-like elements. That sort of broad, flat sort of feeling. Does end up kind of like interestingly knobbly kneed when you do that, but definitely doesn't have the same sort of silhouette. It's very top heavy, very chunky. Makes me wonder if I can switch that up a little bit and not have collapse. Like if I were to squish this down, right? And then take it over here. See, I kind of like the more rounded version of that. It's a little bit closer to human silhouette in some ways, but still within a jellyfish realm. And easily I could see these two, going back and forth. If it's not a solid, a solid form that cannot change states. There is, of course, also just the straight up jellyfish potential, which I haven't really considered. Because some of these down here, like this has a bit of the leg format, but it's also got this ribbon-like element that I like. And this is also, not a fully formed sort of thing. I like the idea of, like, parts of it that don't need to be fully formed just not being fully formed. Maybe invoking a bit more of this sort of ropey sort of feeling. Kind of stringy and strung out like this. I haven't done too much of that yet. Maybe because I imagine that's going to be more challenging if I'm trying to rig something. But this sort of like stringy and like thinly veiled element, which I think there's a bit of it in, a bit of it here, a little bit of it here as well, but there was one in particular where, yeah, like this sort of thing. And I didn't want to make my character like all kind of drippy and overly gross because they're in the water, therefore they're gonna look more dry than wet, which is a fascinating problem to have. But like, yeah, stuff that's a little bit further afield from form is not necessarily terrible. I also haven't thought about the fact that, like I keep trying to make this obey physics and like all be part of the same body, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be a single blob. It could be more decentralized. How do we explore that? I mean, we did that a little bit with this one here, because that's kind of like pushing the limits a little bit more. And if we stretch that out vertically like we did this one, we could potentially I'm just going to delete this right here. I have no desire to do that design, so let's take this boy. We'll copy him. So far, he's one of my strongest. These 4 and 5 are my strongest so far. No. We're gonna take this. We're going to size it up a little bit, and then we're gonna squish it. I like that a little bit better. it has its strengths. Don't get me wrong. When it's wider, wide boy stance, but I like the vertical stance a little bit more. It gives it a feeling like it has a bit more height, especially since we tend to scale things according to what we believe we're seeing. And when I include the skull, people assume it's roughly skull sized. And we don't necessarily have something else for reference. And this being a non human skull, it's much larger. And therefore, it kind of messes with our sense of perspective unless I have something in frame that illustrates how big it actually is. Like some sort of recognizable objects within this form would allow me to get to maybe a place where it's more clear like how large this creature is, because while this little drone body that I've got right here looks super friendly and fun, and when you take into effect that the skull is like the size of a decent sized pumpkin instead of a little handheld human skull, suddenly this drone that I'm in is like the size of a person and doesn't feel like a cute little floating, skull robot anymore. So I'm trying to figure out ways that I can incorporate elements that will give you an idea of relative size before I can actually have it in an environment. And this would be so fun to create in like 3D and have, elements of this sort of thing move. Have it, go around on four legs would be so fun and challenging to rig, but like just having this kind of semi-humanoid rig would make it easier to create a 3D model that functions in a sort of familiar way. The little head bot one might be even easier. It's very brain in a jar, which like I said, I don't hate. I actually kind of like. And I could do similar animation elements that I've done here, but I could have a little bit more breathing room around the skull and a little bit more flexibility because it's not a hardened enclosure like this glass globe. So a little bit more like, over here where things can be flexible and move, and, I can wobble and bobble like Jello and it won't break things. Some things we can certainly do is play with jellyfish ideas. I realize I'm at 6 o'clock. Normally this would be the end of the stream, but I think I'm gonna scribble for a little bit longer. If I'm on a roll, I don't know why I would need to cut the stream off. So that's what we're gonna do. I should probably take a 2-minute break to stretch. Get up, walk around a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and take 5. Now I'm debating with myself because I need to get food too. The age-old debate of the artist whether or not I should feed myself or continue to feed my mind. You know what? Let's err on the side of healthy balance, and I'll go ahead and say we'll call the stream here for today. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of quieter time, me figuring out concepts, and I know it wasn't normally the music playing and quiet. I probably talked a lot towards the end, but sometimes that's what you need to work through a process. You don't need to do it in absolute silence. Like, talking out loud sometimes really helps me shake an idea loose and understand what it is that I'm going for. Whereas keeping it all in your head just means it gets jumbled and lost easier. I think it maybe also helps with like an ADHD sort of element of it, where if I'm just in my head, there's so many other things in there, but if I'm focusing on talking as well as drawing it, then sometimes it can push that process forward. Doesn't help me when I'm rendering, but concepting and trying to design stuff, talking about things definitely helps. And I actually found a pretty good, I mean, it's a cluster, pretty good arrangement for my windows and stuff today. So I was finally able to watch all the chats and at least mostly keep track of things. So that will be it for today. That was the quiet stream, the quiet art stream. Not a lot of shouting and running around and screaming, at least. We'll be back hopefully for some cooperative gaming on Friday, and have some more art stuff going out on social medias and the discords and all the things here for too long, as I get some of these concepts ready to go and just kind of share out some different ideas. I'm still not perfect at it. It still doesn't look professional and inspiring like a lot of the stuff that I'm drawn to, but that's a part of the process. I've done this maybe 5, 6, 8 times, just whenever I fully commit to trying to concept stuff the long way instead of just going straight for whatever was in my head, and often falling a little short of the mark because I just try and roll through and make each thing a completed drawing and don't allow stuff to be half formed and then put to the side for later. Like, this process is taking me a while to get used to, but it has yielded some interesting results, and I see some patterns in my designs that are guiding me in the right direction to creating some interesting iterations, and maybe even coming away with multiple viable designs that can all be used. Because why limit yourself to one? Why throw away a good design just because you were only trying to get one that day? Keep them all for later. At least in theory. I'm going to take a little break, get some food, and get back to work after the stream's over. So, thanks for hanging out and listening and watching me stumble through this process cold. I need to draw more if I'm going to keep up with this design process, because it took me almost an hour to warm up today before I started getting something real. I guess that lets me know how much I need to be working before the streams and stuff start. Alright. Hope you have been having a good week and continue to. And I will see everybody next time.